Sacramento City College has been honored to be part of the Degree Qualifications Profile grant from the Lumina Foundation. This video summarizes our involvement in this project. First, let's talk about what we did versus what we said we were going to do. We proposed comparing our existing general education outcomes with the DQP 5 core objectives to determine similarities, differences, and gaps, and we were able to complete that. We also proposed comparing the program learning outcomes, or PROLOs, of each of our 3 AAAS degrees with the DQP 5 objectives, again to determine similarities, differences, and gaps. And again, we completed that for communication, math, and psychology. Our last proposal involved tweaking, adding, revising, and adjusting to better align the PROLOs on the GE and the program levels, and that is still under discussion on our campus. However, we did complete some additional items that we hadn't proposed. First, we held a flex activity to introduce the project to faculty and staff. We also introduced the concept to our academic senate, and we have included discussions of DQP, specifically what kinds of courses are appropriate for a community college, at our college curriculum committee meetings. So how did we map? Well, we took 2 directions. We started from the inside out, and then we went from the outside in. From the inside out means we started by looking at the degrees, and this entailed 3 steps. First, we compared the program learning outcomes for each of our AAT degrees that we identified against the DQP criteria, so specifically just the program learning outcomes for each of communication, math, and psychology degrees. Then we expanded beyond the specific PROLOs for each of the program and looked at what courses a student would take to get an AAT degree. So this would include the GE courses, and we compared those against the DQP criteria. And then we summarized our comparisons. Now for the outside in, we looked at our GE learning outcomes in general, comparing our GE learning outcomes against the DQP criteria. So now we'll start from the inside out, which is starting with the degrees. The first step was to review the program learning outcomes for each of the AAT degrees. Then we compared each of the program learning outcomes of the degrees against the DQP criteria to see which criteria the AA degrees program learning outcomes fulfilled. So for example, in this case, we're looking at the communication program learning outcomes and how they matched up with specialized knowledge in the DQP outcomes or intellectual skills. So then we went beyond the program learning outcomes for each of the specific degrees and looked to see what would happen if a student got our degree, including all of the general ed requirements. And to do that, we created a sample student education plan for each of the disciplines. We then reviewed the student learning outcomes for each of the courses identified in the sample SEP. In this case, the creative writing course, which happens to meet our humanities requirement for graduation, we felt matched quite well with the intellectual skills 5th criteria of communication fluency. We followed this up by summarizing the sample SEPs for each of the disciplines, and then mapping those back to the DQP outcomes. For example, you can see that for the intellectual skills criteria of analytical inquiry, each of the degrees that we analyzed mapped quite well to that category. In order to map broad integrative knowledge, we had to subdivide this into 5 subareas, and these are based upon the introductory paragraph in the DQP pamphlet, which identified that broad higher learning should involve students in the practices of core fields, ranging from science and the social sciences through the humanities and arts, and in developing global, cultural, and democratic perspectives. So then we mapped off the SEPs again to see which criteria it met under broad integrative knowledge. What did we find out from mapping our AAT PROLOs to the DQP criteria? Several things. The first is we looked at the wording of the DQP criteria, and we felt that there was some overlap between some of the criteria. For example, how is the first intellectual inquiry criteria of analytical inquiry different from the broad integrative knowledge area in general? We also felt that there was some need for clarity in some of the DQP criteria wording, particularly in the area of broad integrated knowledge. For example, we had difficulty with the words problem and debates as we were mapping the arts courses, although we were sure that our arts courses met the criteria. We also were concerned about whether we were overthinking the broad integrative knowledge. Were these 5 areas of science, social science, humanities, arts, and developing global, cultural, and democratic perspectives Did each of these areas need to be met by a specific course, or did we need to ensure that all 5 were being met on an overall basis? We were also experiencing difficulties based upon our own SLOs and the way they were written. This is due to the academic freedom that we tried to allow in our courses. We knew that several of our courses in both the communication and the sociology disciplines address several contemporary problems and challenges, but they were not specifically identified in the course SLOs. So then we looked at what happens when you match the DQP criteria to our PROLOs, the other way around. We found that our SCC courses mapped out very well to all of the criteria as we understood them. We did not observe any gaps, as you can see from this graphic. Another thing that we want to draw attention to is that although we had courses that matched up to the civic learning outcomes in the DQP project, it is possible those were coincidental due to just the way the courses were selected as a sample SEP. However, we do want to point out that several of our courses in our AATs are taught with a civic learning piece, but it's up to the professor and is not specifically identified in the course SLOs. So now let's go the other way around, how we mapped from the outside in. First, we reviewed SCC's JELOs, our General Education Learning Outcomes. Then we compared each of the JELOs with the DQP criteria, and we found out what we had in common, which we identified in this sample in green, as well as what our JELOs have that the DQP outcomes don't identify. For example, demonstrate effective reading strategies and study skills for lifelong learning happens to show up in our JELOs, but we couldn't find them in the DQP outcomes. What did we find out from mapping our JELOs to DQP criteria? First, we believe that the core of broad integrative knowledge is covered in our JELOs. Secondly, we feel that the specialized knowledge is very well covered within each of the disciplines, and that the intellectual skills and applied learning criteria are covered through multiple JELOs, with the exception of engaging diverse perspectives. The civic learning outcomes in the DQP don't appear to be thoroughly addressed in our own JELOs. And as mentioned earlier, we do have lots of other JELOs that the DQP doesn't have that address a wide variety of skills. Our next steps are to continue utilizing the mapping framework to guide our college conversations in several areas, and we intend to incorporate what we learn from other institutions into our college conversation. Finally, Sacramento City College very much appreciates the opportunity to participate in this grant.